Welcome, CPR Sports. We have Peter Nicol here, former world #1 squash player, numerous champions, British Open, TOC and Grand Central, and more importantly, a fabulous person, and is going to share with us today what his life was like growing up as a kid and becoming a phenomenal squash player. So welcome, Peter. We're here in Grand Central, so it's a little noisy.
Yeah, but what an atmosphere! This is a place growing up, this is the place you'd want to play squash when you grow up. You know, glass court, 600 people, thousands of people going by, New York City. Can't get any better.
We can't get you. You're still here.
I'm still here. I'm not playing, and I refuse to. But I'm here. I'm watching.
Well, let's get into this. Tell us what your life was like as a child in sports, how you started out. Was it playing lots of sports on the squash court a lot?
I started playing sports from a really young age. I was 4 years old when I started going to badminton halls with my parents. They played in badminton leagues. And I remember I used to play under the net with my sister. You know, that's how I was tiny. I'm still not that big. But and then from there I went on to tennis. And then when I was 8, I graduated into squash. But however, all the way through until I was about 15 years old, I'd play all sports. Yeah. So the summer months would consist of golf, tennis, running, whatever outdoors, cricket. And then the winter months would be soccer, squash, badminton, and any indoor sports. I liked the fact, I'd always run everywhere I went. So if I had to get somewhere, I live in a small town, I would run to see my friends if they're a mile away, or I'd at least walk, but probably run. So all the way through my junior life, I was just basically staying fit, being incredibly active. And what I realized later was learning a huge amount of information from all the different sports, whether it be individual pairs or team sports, which was invaluable when I ended up taking the sport more seriously.
Yeah. So when did you start taking the game of squash more seriously? When did you start playing tournaments? And walk us through sort of your development of the game.
I started playing tournaments when I was away from my home club, so traveling, when I was about 11. And I'd go with big groups. So the first couple of times it wasn't even with my parents, it was just with a big group of people that Dr. Eric Farr, the local squash coach who ran the Aberdeenshire junior squash group, took us to. So that was really a huge amount of fun. You know, you're basically sleeping in sleeping bags with 10 other kids on a living room floor, and then getting up and playing squash, and that was so much fun. I was about 11. Then I started going with my parents maybe when I was 12, and then by the time I was probably 13, 14, I was taking it a little more seriously. Still only playing in the winters, not in the summers. I was still playing 4 times a week, 3-4 times a week. But it was kind of structured. You know, I'd still go and mess around with my friends, but I'd be playing a couple of league matches, practice session, and then maybe a group training session at the weekend if there wasn't a tournament. But again, only from September through to April.
And were you having great success then? I mean, were you early on sort of identified as like, hey, this kid's really good and getting pushed? Or were you, what role were your parents playing?
I was identified as being good in the area and then in Scotland. But in terms of squash, that didn't mean anything. You know, Scotland was not known as producing any squash players, so there were players in other parts of the world, England and then other parts of the world, that were way better than I was. My parents were incredibly supportive. They weren't particularly wealthy. They were both teachers, so they had to go out and find sponsorships from local business people for aspects of going to events, maybe to get some equipment. That sort of part of it. So then there was a implicit expectation then that I would take it seriously because it was a challenge for them, which I understood and was accepted. But at the same time, it was all within a structure of a healthy. All my parents ever asked me for is if I was on the squash court was to, one, behave properly and decently, and the second thing, try as hard as I could. So if I was on there doing routines, I wouldn't waste my time. I'd be there doing it as best as I could for the 40 minutes that I was on court. So it's almost like a lesson not to waste your life. You know, so do it properly.
Right. And do you think you were better off as a player as you got more serious, that you continue playing other sports, the badmintons and tennis and
Absolutely.
soccer and everything?
I never once got fed up playing squash, I don't think, as a kid.
Right.
Yeah, the only time I then had problems with, not problems, but issues with motivation were times in my professional career, as all professionals do, because it's full on. You're not getting away from it. You have some bad results and you have to deal with it, but it's your life.
Right.
When I was a kid, what was wonderful was that it was part of what I did. I was much more serious at squash than anything else, but I was a decent soccer player. I was an okay tennis player, and I loved the other sports that I played.
Right.
So it was sort of I would stop at some point and do something else.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so full on that it was everything.
So you were fresh.
Yeah, I was always. By the time squash season came around again, and as I got older, squash season, obviously tennis season would be from May to August, and then by the time I was 14, 15, by the start of August, I'm like, can I get back on court now? You know, I wanted to get back on court, and it continued later through. Until end of May, say, or start of June, and then to the point where I was sort of 16 and I stopped playing soccer, I stopped playing tennis, and just played squash for a couple of years while I finished my education.
Yeah.
So,
who was the biggest influence on your development as on the court? Was it your parents or
it was my
coaches?
Father.
Yeah.
My father was my coach. He's a physical education teacher. He was a fantastic soccer player, great in badminton, tennis, cricket, golf, anything he turned his hand to. He's a natural athlete.
Yeah.
And he only started playing squash with me. So that meant that he was learning with me, but he just understood the concepts of sport, what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, the psychology, the physicality. So he didn't know much about the game, but he learned with me and learned quickly because he was an intelligent, sporting brain.
Right. And when you look at, sports has changed a lot since you and I were kids, and kids are specializing much younger. What's your opinion on that? Do you think it's healthy? I mean, obviously you're seeing kids at younger ages become very, very proficient, but I also see the injuries, the burnout is going along alongside that.
Yeah, I have a big issue with it because I think kids should be allowed to and should be encouraged to play lots of different sports.
Yeah.
I think it's healthy for one as an individual. Like I said, playing the individual sports, the pair sports, the small teams, the large team sports, there's different atmospheres and different skills you're learning, not just in the sports, but socially.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important, not to be too specific from a young age. I didn't really do that until I was 18, 19, really, when I turned professional. And I caught up with players who were beating me for no points within a year.
Right.
So, and it was all the knowledge that I learned before that helped me do that, as well as the ability then to focus on one sport.
Right.
Whereas the players that had been doing it all the way through, just focusing on one sport, sort of either lost their way or stopped improving or fell out of love with the sport a lot. So, I personally would love to see kids playing the sport for fun, with a passion and with a commitment and a goal, but then also playing other sports as well and encouraging those other sports, because I mean, rest is as good as, all that sort of, it's good to have a break from the sport and come back to it fresh and different.
Do you see any differences around, you travel the world and interact with kids all over the world, do you see a difference in the cultures with the parent-child relationships and the pressures and my guess is that here in the U.S. we're much more focused on the wins and losses and getting to the tournaments and having success.
Yeah.
Just my experience in other sports, where some other cultures it's a little bit more laid back and they appreciate more the practice time and value that. Mm-hmm. But what have you been seeing?
I think that parents are parents, and they're fairly similar all around in lots of ways. So there are parents who are very difficult to deal with in the sense of for their kids, it's either they're on top of them and trying to get them to be successful and really putting pressure on, and that happens worldwide.
Right.
And it's tough to see because, kids are kids, they're learning and they're growing and they're trying to get by in the world and trying to understand what's going on. The biggest difference I would say here in North America, and especially in the States, is that the kids are being overcoached. So there's a lot of one-on-one. There's a lot of short sessions that basically don't relate necessarily to playing a match, to playing games. It's very isolated, so it's a coach and a player. So the experience is completely different over here for most kids. So then they go and play tournaments. It's a hugely pressurized situation. They're not used to playing matches. They're not used to being in that environment. And then there's the expectation, because all the money's been spent, all the time's been spent. They maybe have their own coach at an event. As a 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old. I went with my dad, my parents came, but my sister was also there. My dad helped other kids. Or if I was with a group, it was with a coach who was helping 7, 8, 9 kids. So if you played a match, you were on your own, unless they happened to be there. Or my dad sometimes wouldn't come down and speak to me. He'd leave me to get on with it. He'd be there and supportive, and then we'd talk about it afterwards. So I think the biggest thing here, and the biggest thing I'd like to see changed over here, is the fact that more group sessions, more social type squash where people are training and practicing together. It's very common in Egypt. The coaches are there to organise the whole overall squad more than actually do individual coaching. And you can see it in the way they play and the way they are. It's a much more fluid, natural way of playing squash, enjoyable. It's an expression of how they are and who they are.
Right.
That's because there hasn't been that coaching.
So you think that's? I've been heard the term that they're more creative than some of the other players, and you think that's where it comes from, because they're allowed to just explore and just go with what is natural to them.
Yeah, absolutely. But they have a different issue. They have young kids playing for 4 or 6 hours a day.
Right.
At sports school, which in itself is different. It's causing huge problems with, I think with burnout as well.
Yeah.
And kids who are number 1 under 13, you might not even see them under 15. Then someone else comes along, and it's great for producing champions, because it's a real dog eat dog sort of world, and winners win, losers lose.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that's the right system either. I think
the
balance is the thing for me. You need individual coaching, you need group coaching, and you need kids to go out and just play and enjoy themselves with their friends in a social environment, and they'll learn a lot that way.
Yeah.
I think just in general terms, don't kids, the biggest influence in their life are their peers, whatever parents think or whatever school and everything else, their peers are the ones that influence. So it's the same in squash, in my opinion.
What do you see as the biggest factor between the kids who've got the skills and the talent, who make it and don't make it?
Mental, I think, is nearly everything. So I actually think it's better to be not quite as talented. I wasn't quite as talented. So when you talk about racket skills, I think when we talk about talent, we talk about racket skills and playing the game.
Right.
There's lots of talents. So there's physical talent, there's mental talent, there's racket skills, striking the ball, all sorts of things.
Sure.
But the players who are known for striking the ball, who are known as talented kids or talented players, it can come too easy. And they can do things too easy. And then once all of a sudden, when they're 13, 14, all of a sudden the person they're playing is physically strong and able to get the ball back, it's too hard. I don't want to do that, because they never had to go through the experience. And that's when you find out someone's like a phenom or an exception. That's your Ramy Ashour, that's your in squash, that's your Tiger Woods, that's your the people who are as good with a racket as anyone, but also have the mental and physical ability to be the best in the world. That doesn't happen very often. So for me, I like to work with kids who first and foremost have the mindset that I like to see, which is the balanced understanding of what squash is to them, but at the same time incredibly competitive and want to win and want to be better, want to improve themselves, and the reason they're doing it is a challenge to themselves. But at the same time, I've no issue with working with slight physical issues or technical issues, because it sort of can make them hungrier and make them understand and appreciate the sport more.
So if you could give advice to parents who've got kids who are competing and doing well, and what would you recommend to them if their kids are showing the passion to go to the next level?
I'd love them to support them. It's wonderful. I think it's amazing what parents do to really support their kids, but at the same time have a perspective as to why they're doing it, both the kid and the parent, and what their expectations are. And just to make sure that, although to demand, I don't think demanding a good amount from that kid is unreasonable. I think it's right. You know, if there's time and money being put into it.
Right.
But at the same time, understand what the kid's going through, the learning process that they're going through in life, and how hard it is, and cut them some slack. And not make it too pressurized, because they're trying to get by in life and learning just life skills. Never mind trying to cope with being a semi-professional squash player. It's too much. You know? So it's that balance again.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Anything you want to add that I didn't touch upon?
I just think that the biggest thing for me is with all, we talked about all of it, but enjoyment. Yeah. I started playing squash because I loved the game.
Right.
And obviously there are occasions that it's stressful and it's difficult, and if you're striving, there's the balance between frustration and enjoyment, and it's not going to be as easy as always going to be plain sailing, that it's going to be fun and everything else. We tried to remember the enjoyment part of it. That's why we all started. That's why we played it. I fell in love with it through that. So not to lose that along the way. So now I've been playing for 31 years. I still love the sport. I look forward to getting back on court and playing.
Right.
And if everyone can do that through their life, then you've got a sport that is really giving you a lot. You can appreciate it. You're going to be healthy from playing it, as long as you look after yourself. And I would rather see that than anything else. I'd rather see participation numbers growing with people who are loving and enjoying the sport.
Yeah, it's great.
That's my biggest thing.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Peter, thank you very much. This has been a real pleasure. Great insights onto your development and helping kids to be better players and better people, and to your point, enjoying the game.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben.